Unidentified flying objects. Whether you believe in them or not, most people know somebody who claims to have seen one. But few people's claims about UFOs are as intriguing and detailed as a man named Bob Lazar. If Lazar's story is true, you better forget everything you thought you knew about UFOs. Because according to old Bob, they fly like this. By the time you finish the video, you'll be convinced they exist. Head link down in the description. One morning in December 1988, physicist Bob Lazar arrived at a secretive government base in the Nevada desert for his first day's work. The base, known as S4, was part of the larger complex defined as Area 51. Most of us associate Area 51 with alien conspiracies nowadays, but it was relatively unknown to the public before Bob Lazar's story broke in the late 80s. But what was his story? Well, it's weird from beginning to end, so buckle up. According to Bob, his first day's work was filled with confusion and astonishment. When he arrived at the secretive facility, which was camouflaged to look like a mere feature of desert rock, he noticed a series of large warehouse doors. These were all shut at the time, but their purpose would eventually become clear to Lazar. After entering the facility, Bob was soon left feeling baffled. He was told all sorts of bizarre things relating to contact with extraterrestrial beings, their presence on Earth, and even the precise galaxy from which they originated. According to Bob, with secretive projects like these, misdirection is often used, so that it becomes difficult for employees to distinguish fact from fiction. Information is given on a need-to-know basis, and often certain details given to employees are straight-up lies. The wacky stories recounted to each staff member by higher-ups are unique to the individual. This means in the event that someone shares what they've learned, the government will be able to immediately know exactly who's blabbed, depending on what information comes to the surface. Being aware of this, Bob was highly skeptical of the seemingly nonsensical information he was being fed. When he was shown to the area in which he'd be working, however, everything changed. During his briefing, Bob learned the purpose of his employment: reverse engineering a piece of incredibly advanced recovered technology. But this wasn't just any technology. According to his superiors, the strange metal object, consisting of a dome resting over a cone-shaped cylinder, was the propulsion system of an aircraft once belonging to extraterrestrial visitors. How the government came into possession of the artifact, Lazar's superiors never revealed. Bob was, of course, skeptical, but his skepticism fell away the moment he tried to touch the dome. When in operation, the dome had an inexplicable ability to repel anything that came near it. Like pushing two positive magnet ends together, the object pushed back against Bob's hands, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't touch the dome. When the device was disassembled and out of action, the effect stopped. How an object could create an effect like magnetism on non-magnetic objects was only one part of the question. The real question came with the true function of the object. Bob was informed that the object was one of multiple propulsion devices used in a spacecraft, and it was Bob's job to figure out how it worked. In the half a year Bob worked at S4, he was unable to come to many conclusions, besides the device being fueled by a stable version of something called Element 115. This element, now known as moscovium, wasn't synthetically produced by humans until 2003, and even then, it wasn't stable enough to stick around much longer than half a second. But according to Bob, whoever made the propulsion device's fuel had been able to use a stable version of the molecule, which was responsible for its anomalous properties. And it was these properties that determined the unusual flight of the spacecraft. On a small number of occasions, Bob was permitted to not only see the fully assembled spacecraft up close, but to see it in action. The craft was, in Bob's descriptions, saucer-shaped with a flattened bottom and a slightly raised top. The inside of the craft was mostly featureless and smooth, featuring molded chairs that would only have seated children or humanoids much smaller than humans. Lazar's device belonged in the lower base of the craft alongside others of the same kind. These objects were used for propelling and steering the craft and could rotate to suit this purpose. One of the devices remained in the very center of the craft and seemed to provide a consistent thrust, like the jet at the rear of an airplane. Only the mechanism of the craft's flight was totally different to any man-made technology. What's more, Bob describes its movement as notably different from the flying saucers we know and love from science fiction. It flew, in Bob's words, belly first. The craft would initially shoot upwards into the air before rotating into a vertical position. From this strange sideways angle, it would shoot off silently at speeds unparalleled by any man-made machine. You may be wondering, wouldn't air resistance be an issue? Here's where it gets even crazier. Air resistance, Lazar claims, was never an issue for these crafts simply because they weren't fighting against the air. You see, the propulsion devices in the craft's base didn't simply shoot energy out behind. They warped the very fabric of space. These devices were gravity waveguides, shaping gravity around the craft. In physics, gravity isn't so much a pulling force as a distortion. The greater the mass something has, the more it distorts the fabric of space, drawing objects in like a bowling ball on a bedsheet covered in marbles. So instead of pushing against the air like an airplane, the spacecraft would use its anomalous propulsion devices to warp the space around it, moving itself along with zero resistance. Specifically, Bob claims it distorted the very fabric of reality by channeling its gravity waves into a heart shape, which pushed or pulled it along. And craziest of all, Bob's craft wasn't the only one at the base. Those big warehouse doors I mentioned earlier, well, one day, Bob came into work and saw them open. In each of the 9 passages, Bob saw a different spacecraft, totally unique in design and presumably function. He was never able to get any information on the others, but for there to be so many of such variation, Bob couldn't help wondering where on Earth, or perhaps where in the universe, the government acquired them all. All he knew was that the one he studied could change the world as we know it, if only its secrets were shared with the public. Or at least this is what Lazar claims. After his time at S4 was over, Bob struggled with what he'd learned, and whether it was his duty to share his knowledge with the world. He went public with his story in 1989, initially anonymously, to various news stations around America. This garnered him the public support of Peabody Award-winning journalist George Knapp, who to this day claims to believe Lazar's story. After this initial circuit of revelation, Bob fell mostly into obscurity until the release of Jeremy Corbell's 2018 documentary about him. But can we trust the potentially earth-shattering claims of one man? There's no definitive answer, and after this video, you'll have to decide for yourself. But as you might expect, Bob's tale isn't without its fair share of criticism. Firstly, the vast majority of scientists who've commented on the Lazar case condemn his comments about element 115. Even if it could be formed into stable fuel, the small quantities described by Bob would be nowhere near the amount needed to warp spacetime in the way he described. The energy required by our current understanding would be simply astronomical, and that's if it's even possible at all. Granted, Bob has passed polygraph tests when questioned about his story, which some see as evidence that he's telling the truth. But these tests are not foolproof and only prove, if anything, that Bob genuinely believes what he's saying. They don't prove that any of it actually happened. Then, of course, there's the question. If Bob Lazar is legit, why didn't the government attempt to silence him? If he was leaking classified information, wouldn't it have been entirely within their power to make him stay quiet? Did they just assume that no one would believe him? Or was the whole thing an elaborate hoax? Truthfully, a few facts do seem to draw Bob's honesty into question. Bob claims to have received degrees from both MIT and Caltech, yet neither college has any record of his attendance. On the other hand, Lazar argues that his records have been purposefully erased by authorities, alongside other records like his birth certificate, in an effort to discredit him. So did Bob lie about his education, and maybe even about his records being erased? Or were there shadier governmental forces at play? Let me know what you believe in the comments below. So is there any credence to Bob Lazar's incredible story? Intriguingly, the arguments in favor may come down to motivation. According to Bob, the motivator to share his story was not fame nor money. It was insurance. You see, Bob claims that soon after he began sharing information about his time at S4, he and his wife became victims to threats and attacks. According to Bob's accounts, after several encounters, including having his car's wheels shot out while on the highway, it became clear that he was being targeted. Someone, it seemed, was trying to silence him. He saw no other choice but to go public, hoping that doing so would at the very least draw suspicions to the circumstances of his death if he was killed. What's more, Bob stated on many occasions that going public made his life notably worse and has affected him in deeply negative ways. Indeed, his life did go a little off the rails in the years after, with a divorce and an arrest for aiding and abetting prostitutes among his low points. Some have argued that these events were evidence of a lacking moral character, making public deception a possibility. But a few bad decisions don't necessarily discredit a story that has stayed largely consistent for 3 decades. A story that is, in fairness, incredibly detailed and which is built on a very clear, deep understanding of physics. Plus, Bob has always admitted to the limitations of his knowledge and recollection of the events at S4. Specifically, he admits uncertainties on certain facets, like the details of the spacecraft's discovery. Bob recently admitted that while he seems to remember hearing talk of S4's crafts being ancient in nature, he can't be certain that his memory serves him. Confessing to his own limitations and sticking to them may give some credence to Bob's story, but perhaps some truth lies in the positive results of Bob's lie detector test. He does seem to genuinely believe what he says, whether it's really true or not. Whether this information came from real experiences, fantasies, or dreams, we have no way of knowing. After hearing all that, you'd certainly be justified in doubting Bob's claims. In truth, until recently, there's very little evidence to back them up. On the one hand, the US government did carry out investigations into UFOs through Project Blue Book in the 50s and 60s. But there were never any official reports confirming alien technology, how it worked, or any specifics about the origins of these UFOs. But very recent developments have shone some new light on the claims of Bob Lazar. In 2017, a US governmental organization called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was made public. It had operated in secret between 2007 and 2012 and had amassed substantial evidence about the phenomenon of UFOs, documenting countless cases of inexplicable aerial phenomena. For one thing, the fact that the organization existed in secret for years may suggest that similar organizations could still exist, possibly even harboring secrets about extraterrestrial technologies. But even without delving into conspiracy theories, the aftermath of the program has been pretty astounding. You see, after the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program ended, its core members shared some of their findings with the public. These findings included one particular collection of video clips captured by Navy officials. The Navy itself has since officially confirmed that the videos released in 2017 show what they describe as unidentified aerial phenomena. Oddly enough, the clips show unidentifiable 40 feet long oblong objects moving through the air at incredible speeds. They rotate throughout their journeys without an obvious mechanism of turning and accelerate fast enough to escape the cameras tracking them. But weirdest of all, the crafts, if that is indeed what they are, appear to fly belly first. Sound familiar? If that's not enough proof that they exist, I don't know what will be. So with all the evidence considered, do you buy any part of Bob Lazar's story? It's certainly a head scratcher, so share your views in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.